Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, today I'm going to be Professor Ian Phillips for the course Education 101. This is the 6th lecture in the series on stakeholder engagement. And so before we get started, I just want to say timestamps will be in the description below. So if you do want to move forwards, backwards, in circles, do loops, you can do so. But before we get into stakeholder engagement, I do want to say we will have a brief review on technology-based instruction or technology in the classroom. And so we'll try to make that quick, but do feel free to skip forward with those timestamps if you do not need a review from last lecture. All right, so stakeholder engagement and collaboration, we'll cover that right after this review. So, technology in the classroom, what is there to talk about? Why is it important? What are some examples of technology in the classroom? We're only going to spend a few minutes on this, so let's make it quick. When I think of technology, I think of it sort of as it's a differentiation method in its own right. It's not something that you just, it's like an underlying thing that you want to integrate into your classroom, but it's still differentiation because you're altering instruction to better fit the needs of the students. And those needs of the students have changed throughout the years. You could say 30, 40 years ago, technology wasn't as important and you didn't need it as much as you do nowadays. And it's not to say that you need it to teach, right? Because people will say, well, you need technology to teach, and how can you teach without technology? It's like, that's a good question, but in the wrong context. People have been teaching for tens of thousands of years without technology, so why on earth would you possibly need it now? Like, you can just spend your time in a library reading, and you'll get just as educated as you could if you were just on Google or using YouTube or whatever, right? And so these things are a little bit subjective in how kids learn best, but one of the reasons you need technology is like, how can you teach without technology? The reason people say that is because they need these real-world skills, the technical skills in the job market nowadays to function, or in higher education for that matter. And so these kids who are underprepared, right, they don't know how to use PowerPoint, they don't know how to use Google Drive, they don't know how to send an email, they've never had any experience maybe building a website, for example, or even worse, doing research online. They have no idea how to do research online or differentiate the sources when they do know how to do research online. How are they going to be successful in today's modern age? It's a very interesting question, and I come to the conclusion that they can't be successful. Or it's going to take them a lot longer than their peers because they weren't provided with those skills. And so today's education focuses a little bit more on critical thinking, trying to get students to do their own research and come to grand conclusions about things. And that's important. And that comes with the research component, which I think is the main reason we want to use technology. People are oftentimes horrific. They have horrible research skills. They have no idea how to use Google. They can't come to reasonable conclusions about topics that they encounter in the world. And so they just take as fact what they hear from others. And that information may be coming through social media in most cases. And social media sometimes isn't wrong, but you have to be able to differentiate between different sources. And so, or fact check things for that matter. How can you fact check information? Well, that's an interesting thing, and I feel like social studies does a really good job at teaching kids how to evaluate sources, at least in Ohio anyways. Other states are becoming a little bit more progressive in that regards. But it's still a difficult problem for students to encounter, that they're going to encounter in their lives. And if we don't provide them with these skills via technology, well, it's going to be very difficult for them to function. I mean, just think about it. I mean, like, you're not going to pull out an encyclopedia every single time you want to look up some fact. You're going to do your research online nowadays. And if you can't, well, then you're just going to get left behind. And that's the last thing that we want for our students. And so these technical skills, even when they don't even seem applicable. Let's take the case of the lawn mowing company, right? And you think, why do you need a website if you run a lawn mowing company? Well, the reason you need a website is because you can list pricing. You can put samples of your work, or examples of your work for everybody to look at. You can maybe have a review board. You can have contact information. Maybe you could even have a way to book and schedule an appointment. So free times and times that your business operates, or maybe even the ordinances of the cities in which you operate on your website. And so there's a number of different things that you can do if you're just a lawn mowing company and you think, well, I could be the best lawnmower in the world. It's like, and you could be, and maybe you can make the best lawns in the world with the best gardening and the like, and that would be a great profession for you. But the problem is, you need to somehow get customers. And if you can't get any customer acquisition, and sure, you'll get some through word of mouth and other door-to-door and whatnot. But if they can't even look you up, how do they even know if they're reputable? And some people aren't going to go with you because of that. And so it's just a nice skill. It's not so that everybody's going to be building a website, but at least if you give them the skills to do so, maybe they don't have to pay $300, $400 in order to do so from somebody else on like Fiverr or something, right? Or just anybody who builds a website. And so these things are oftentimes not the most applicable to students' careers. I mean, not everybody's going to go on to higher education. Not everybody's going to go on to professions where they need, say, a PowerPoint, for example. But it's nice to give them that skills because people don't know where they're going to end up in many, many years. So if you look at today's generation, oftentimes they are in a situation where they stay at a job for a couple years and they move on to another job, a job that they find perhaps more interesting, perhaps more conducive towards their long-term success and career goals, or even just monetary for that matter. Maybe they don't even have goals. They just want to make more money. And so people are always moving around. It's a little bit different than in the past where people would stay for 30, 40 years and gather some big pension, and that was it for them. They found a nice job, they stick with it, and now they got their pension and they're retired, and maybe they didn't even enjoy what they did. But nowadays people are moving around, so the job market's just, people are flowing everywhere. And so you never know where you're going to end up. And it's just nice to have some of these skills because you don't want to be stuck having to learn them on the job because there's going to be a big learning curve, and it just gives you an advantage when you get into an interview. You say, I've already done this, blah, 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 blah. And even though I'm still a little rusty on it, like I could look it up. And that's one of the skills you want to foster is like the research component of things. So technology in the classroom, extremely important. We're not going to talk any more about it now. If you want, you can refer back to the other lecture. I'll probably put at the end of the lecture in the, not the description. I could put it in the description. But you can just look at the playlist on the channel, and you'll be able to find it pretty easily. So technology in the classroom. But I could put it on the end screen, too. So when this lecture ends, you'll see it pop right up, if you would like. So stakeholder engagement and collaboration, though. Let's get into it. What is a stakeholder, and who are they? This is a pretty interesting word here, stakeholder. And stakeholder is somebody who has a hand in the student's education. Now, again, like with many terms in education and with many terms in just the world in general, some words have so much meaning that they essentially mean nothing at all. And one of the reasons for that is everybody's really a stakeholder in a child's education. Everybody. And I mean that literally. I'm not just saying that. Everybody is a stakeholder in the child's education. Even the people you think have no interaction with a child, they do in some regards. And so, look, we got a list here. Parents, students, community members, peers, teachers, staff members, and we could even put just any person in general, right? But we're just leaving it to some main stakeholders here. Now you think, well, okay, they're stakeholders, that makes sense, right? And stakeholders, anybody who has a hand in a child's education, it's like, yeah, they're impacting the child's education in some regards. They're like, that makes sense. But what about the person that they're just walking past along the street, right? You walk past them and you never see each other ever again, right? They're still a stakeholder. Why? Because they're influencing the child's education in a positive manner. You think, how on earth are they influencing the kid's education in a positive manner if they're just walking past each other on the sidewalk? Well, what if that person just turned around, looked at the high schooler and just punches them in the face and breaks their jaw? Right? I mean, think about it. It's a real situation that technically could happen. Now, hopefully it doesn't happen, right? What if they just punch them right in the jaw, beat them up or something, they got to go to the hospital? Now they're out of school for 2 days. So the fact that they didn't end up beating up somebody is just a way to have a hand in a child's education, influence it in a positive manner. Because if everybody was, some sociopath walking around beating people up, well, then somebody's got to be on guard more. Somebody has to potentially risk going to the hospital and maybe getting stitches, for example, or maybe even a cast. And so, these things are, everybody's a stakeholder, right? It's not, you can't just say, well, only some people are stakeholders, other people aren't. Everybody's a stakeholder, even if they have the most minor interaction in any capacity, right? If they could potentially influence child's education negatively, then they are a stakeholder because them not acting is a positive interaction that you could potentially put down on a list, right? So think about it. The person, yeah, they don't have as much impact as the parent does, right? But the fact that they walked by and didn't break that person's jaw is still a stakeholder, right? Because if they acted negatively, then it would harm the child's education. So it can't be said enough. It really cannot be said enough. Everybody's a stakeholder, even in the most minor capacity. And so we always want to be striving towards a more pro-social society, a society that wants to raise children and is trying to do so collectively. Right? It takes everybody in the society. And so it goes back to the old proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. That could not be closer to the truth, right? It's identical to the truth, right? You have to get everybody involved. And so one of the things that I've researched is personality. And personality is one of those things that is extremely heritable. And all heritability means is that you're essentially born with what, with what you got, right? So let's take the trait extroversion, for example. Are people born extroverts, or are they made so by their environment, right? The whole nature versus nurture debate. Well, it turns out people are pretty much born extroverts, right? Now, you can make somebody a little bit more introverted, or you can make somebody a little bit more extroverted on the flip side of things. But if you want somebody to have a personality that you want them to, right, and you don't want them to complain about it, that's going to be impossible to do, right? So like you can make an extrovert act like an introvert, but they're gonna absolutely hate it. The chance that they're gonna enjoy that is zero. Right? Now they might be able to do it, and same for the introvert, right? The introvert could still be like a car salesman, but they're just not going to enjoy it. And most people aren't introverts or extroverts. Most people are in the middle. And so it's not even really like a term that, right, it's a spectrum, and so it's not like you're one way or the other. It's more so most people are in the middle, some people are on the extremes. It's a normal distribution, it's a bell-shaped curve. And so these things are very heritable, a lot of these personality traits. And personality is one of those things that it's not malleable, right? You can't really change it. And you can change it a little bit, but you can't change it a lot. And the concept of pro-social behavior, anti-social behavior, what we would call sociability, is also one of those things that you can't really alter that much. Now, you can alter it when they're very little and provide them with etiquette, give them some structure, help your child abide by some rules and expectations in society, and teach them those social norms and how to interact and play with other people and have conversations in a respectful manner. These things are, aspects of a child's being that you can foster into them. And for most kids, it doesn't matter because most kids are going to just be pro-social by birth, right? You're not going to really have any issues with them. And look, you could put them anywhere, and they're still going to come out, relatively sociable, and so they're going to exhibit pro-social behavior, which benefits them. But you're going to have, maybe 20, 30% of people who were born in society who, quite frankly, if they're not socialized, they're going to exhibit antisocial behaviors. And look, you're not going to be able to hold down a job. You can't manage relationships properly. You have a terrible work ethic. And you're just, people don't necessarily like to be around you that much. You're going to be around other antisocial people, and they're going to make you even more antisocial and get you in more trouble. And so, personality is one of these things that, I study, and it is very heritable. And if you're not on top of it at a very young age, which is the fault of our society, it's going to be a very bad time for the student, and there's going to be very little that you can do, even when you want to, and even when you throw all the resources at it that you think might be influential. So, with that said here, we got what is a stakeholder? Who are they? Who are they? So what are the roles of these people? Who are these stakeholders in a child's education? Right? Parents, right? What is their role, really? I mean, is it sporadic? Should they be just occasionally engaged in the child's education? Should it be continual? Should they always be engaged all the time on a daily or weekly basis? Right? And same for community members, right? Sporadic or continual, right? I'm putting down sporadic. And so we'll talk about their roles here right now. So what are parents? We'll start with them first, right? Why do you think parents have a continual role in education? It's like, they're with their child 16 hours a day, maybe less. You could argue, babysitting with other family members. They're at work, the kid's home alone. So it's not like they're always with their kid 16 hours a day. But the parents are going to be with their kid a lot. That's all you really have to know. And when they're not with their kid, somebody else is with their kid. But it's still the parent's responsibility to vet that person who is with their child. And so the parents have an absolutely vital role in the student's education, and let's just say 8 hours a day, because hopefully for the other 8 hours they're sleeping and getting some good rest to rejuvenate their brains and hopefully grow when they're sleeping. Now, for that other 8 hours though, if they're not doing things right, That is a big problem. And just think about it. The kid can be at school for 8 hours, and so maybe they got good influences for 8 hours at school, right? You think, well, that's good. At least they're getting some good influences at school. 8 hours, though. 8 hours out of 16. The other 8, if they're bad influences, 0. 0 out of 16. Wow. Now look at it this way. What is 8 divided by 16? 50%. 50% is failing. Yeah? See, now you see the problem, right? So only half the time these kids are getting some good influences in their life, you're going to have a bad time. It's not going to lead to the results that you expect as a teacher or as an educator for that matter. And so these things are very complicated. And these results are a product of the student's environment. And you could say, well, look, it's really the first few years of education that really make the most difference. And you'd be right on that. You'd be right. And so you could even say, well, maybe the other people from, second grade on to 12th grade don't even really make a difference. It's like, okay, well, let's take that into consideration because that appears to actually be the case. Now, not entirely, right? For social ability, that's more so true. Same for personality, but, I like to think that you can make somewhat of a difference from like second grade, maybe let's just say first grade on to 12th grade, right? But let's look at the literature though. From ages about 5 to 6, students or people, kids for that matter, who are not properly socialized will exhibit these antisocial behaviors. So what grades are from ages like about 5 to 6? Right. Well, let's see, preschool, which is not even mandatory in the country. So people can choose to do so, and it's, can be expensive, and so most people probably don't even do preschool, and it's growing, right? And I shouldn't necessarily say most people, because I bet you a lot of people go to preschool. But not everybody's going to preschool. That's the problem here. So a lot of people aren't going to preschool. And even the preschools that they go to, it's not high quality, right? It's more like daycare. It's not even preschool, right? And they call it preschool, but it's just a marketing gimmick, right? Because what sounds better to a parent? Oh, your child's getting a nice early childhood education in preschool, and we're going to do all this and this and that and this and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but it's really daycare because the parent just wants to drop their kid off, and hopefully their kid doesn't kill anybody, and they turn out fine, and the parent can go to work and get some money for the home. And like maybe that's a good trade-off because if you don't have any money in the home, well, then that leads to a number of different problems too. I mean, we know what poverty does to people. I mean, that's just a given. And so, it's nice to have parents in the picture, but sometimes they might not always be in the picture in the best light. And so let's just take the preschool though. Hopefully we can get preschool, and maybe it makes a good difference, but it's not mandated in the country. And this is the United States. It's not mandated here, even though it should be, because that's where you make the most difference, right? Because that's where you would teach those etiquettes and that etiquette and societal norms and expectations, and teach children how to properly play with one another, and be able to interact in a proper, positive light with others. So we got preschool. What about kindergarten, right? Ages 5 to 6, kindergarten. That's really like your last shot at fostering sociability. And the reason for that is if they're not socialized, eventually their peers are going to want to stay away from them. They're going to segregate themselves. The antisocial kids will be with the other antisocial kids, and that's it. Pro-social kids play with the pro-social kids. Antisocial go with the other antisocial kids. And there'll be a mix, right? But these antisocial kids are going to build off of each other, right? And more antisocial, if the most antisocial person makes everybody else more antisocial. It doesn't work the other way around. So it's not to say that the most pro-social kid doesn't make the most antisocial kid more pro-social. It works in the opposite. The more pro-social kid will get more antisocial. And that's the literature. I mean, you can argue with this and say, well, all the literature that we've done for the last 100 years is wrong. And so maybe you make that case, but that doesn't appear to be the case. And so, well, it's a very difficult problem. Right? How do you only got 2 grades to make this difference for sociability. I mean, how can you possibly put the line over, right? Make it so children just stay on the other side of that line of antisocial behavior, right? So they're avoiding that criminality, just enough so we can stave off any future problems. Well, you engage others, right? If the parents aren't doing a good job, you engage everybody else because it takes a village to raise that child. And that can be a very difficult job. And sometimes you're not going to have all that power when you most need it, which is at these younger ages. And so everybody should be for mandated preschool, state-run preschool, with licensed teachers, people who are licensed just as they would be licensed for the K through 12 system. They should be licensed for preschool. It should be an early childhood education licensure. So maybe, pre-K through 3 or something, pre-K through 5 maybe. It really does depend on whatever you want. That's subjective, arbitrary. But it should be one of the big things that we're promoting going forward. And so one thing that I will say, though, is it does get easier to engage stakeholders as time goes by. Children themselves also have more responsibility for their education as time goes by, however. And so the impact that the stakeholders might be able to make, especially when the student is older, tends to be a little bit more limited, right? Because by that point, they're already set in their ways. And so it's an uphill battle at that point. It's like you're running on a flat surface until they're like 5 or 6, and then it just goes skyrockets uphill. And so, well, these things are complicated. These things are something that we as a society need to reckon with. And so if you're a stakeholder and you're a parent, right, it's probably the most important stakeholder in the matter, individual stakeholder, or individuals stakeholder. I don't know what the right word is, a couple of stakeholders. And so continual basis, you want to be engaged in them all the time. So constantly reaching out to these people, right? Trying to give them some tools, too, that they can use as, well, stakeholders in the child's education in order to make them successful. So maybe the parent themselves, like if a kid's antisocial, they're not exhibiting pro-social behaviors in the world, right? So they don't care about their work, they're not getting good grades, and they are having bad interactions with peers because of their antisocial behavior, and even the teacher for that matter, too, because they just don't, quite frankly, they just don't care as much as they should. And it's because they're not socialized as much as they should. And another thing, too, is kids oftentimes, and I cannot say this enough, because I've mentioned this in a couple lectures already, but you really can't say it enough. It's not like kids are trying to be evil, oftentimes. It's that they don't know how to interact with one another, and that goes back to the sociability. So, if you're the parent and you're antisocial, you're probably going to raise an antisocial kid. Now, not always, right? But there's a good chance that that's probably how things are going to turn out, right? Because they weren't properly socialized by the parents who had the most interaction with them at a very young age, which is when they're most malleable, right? And they can be sculpted and influenced the most. And so, look, parents, absolutely crucial that you're engaged with them in a positive manner as early as possible. So we as a society need to alter that. But let's say that you're in the K through 12 system. What can you do? Or you reach out to parents, you text them, you email them, you call them, you invite them to do events, you have conferences with them, and you're trying to provide them some tools, right? Because if they're antisocial, they're raising these antisocial kids, they might not even understand what these expectations are in the school. And even if they wanted to uphold them, they just might not have the tools to do so because they don't necessarily know what would be acceptable behavior in the class. And so you tell them, right? You say, hey, look, these are the expectations in our classroom. I want to make you aware of these. So-and-so is not abiding by these expectations. It would be really nice if you could just, sit down and talk with them about these. Or you could, so-and-so's struggling with math. I can send you over the notes right now, and hopefully you can provide them some tutoring, extra help when they get home with their homework, because I noticed that they're really struggling. Or just make sure you keep an eye on them and make sure that they study an extra 20 minutes a day because they're really struggling. So engaging these parents and telling them how to do so, right? So it becomes less abstract. Less abstract in the sense that they know now what they need to do. And I feel like people oftentimes know what they need to do. Like if you just sit there and think about it for a minute, you say, well, I know I could be better in this, and this, that, and this, and that, and this, and that regard. But some people they don't know that. They don't know what regards they could be better in because it's not their field, it's not their domain. Now, you could argue and say, well, it should be the parent's domain to be the most influential stakeholder, and so therefore they should know how to properly raise their kid and how to properly work and tutor them and whatnot. But that's simply not the case, and so this is the teacher's domain here. And so just provide them some tools. It's the least that you can do, and you don't got to do it every day, but do it as much as you possibly can. And so parents, students, what about students? When I think of students, I tend to get a little bit upset that most people don't talk about them a little bit more as stakeholders, because the student is the one who has to do the work, right? The student is the one who has responsibility over their grades. Like, I can't force anybody to do anything. I can be the best role model influence on the planet, right? And somebody could just sit there and stare at me, I don't know, like they're a fish or something, right? And just not do any work. Now, hopefully that's not the case and you don't run into that, right? But what if a student just wants to sit there like this and stare at you and they don't want to do any work and they're just like this? Now, it's an extreme example. It's a very extreme example. But what if that's the case? Let's take that as fact for a second. Right? What can you do? They have all the power and responsibility. You cannot force them to pick up that pencil and do the work. Now, you can make your little threats and say, well, I'm going to send you to the principal's office or give you detention or blah, blah, blah. But what if they're not responsive to that and they don't care? They don't care one bit, so they're just going to sit there and just stare at you. They're not going to do any work. And even worse than that, what if they're going to be a disruption to other people? And now they're just going to exhibit antisocial behavior, messing with you and other students and not doing work at the same time. Well, it becomes very difficult to manage. And so, what if that's the case? We're taking it as fact. Just think about it. Right? The responsibility is in their hands. They have to be responsible in some capacity. And people don't like that. They say, well, it's society's fault or the environment's fault and blah, 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 blah. And you can make a case for that. In some regards, it is. Right? Because if everybody was socializing these kids a little bit more properly, then they wouldn't be like that. Now, some would still be like that because it's just their nature, but for the vast, vast, vast majority of people, that wouldn't be the case. And so, student has a lot of responsibility, and you got to be engaging them constantly. And the way that you do that is through differentiation methods, which is the second lecture, I believe. And so you want to constantly be engaging kids in a manner that most fits their needs. So maybe they need to be engaged with more fun activities, games and whatnot. Maybe that's very interesting to them. Things that are a little bit less abstract too, because games are great at teaching facts and not concepts. Maybe they need a little bit more group work, or maybe they just need a different seating arrangement. It's up to your students, and you got to determine that through data-driven instruction. So you look at the data and see what students are responding to, and you alter your instruction accordingly. You also look at best practices and the like, so you're using evidence-based practices in addition with the data-driven practices that you have determined are most effective for your own classroom, right? Because environments are different. What works at one school will not work at another school. And I mean that, right? So you shouldn't always expect the same things that you at any school. You should expect different things for different schools. And now you can expect similar things for schools with similar demographics, right? But if it's not similar, then don't expect it, because it's just, that doesn't make any sense. And so students, you want to constantly be engaging them best you can through differentiation methods, behavior management, and the like. Community members. Now, community members is pretty interesting because they're one of these stakeholders who they don't have the biggest role, and it's very hard to engage them. There's a number of different things that you can do with them on occasion. And so you can have them volunteer at fundraisers, for example. And when I think of community members, I think of just local businesses getting involved with the school. Or maybe even having the school cater something for the kids, right? Like an ice cream party for kids who meet honor roll, for example. And that could be progress reports or actual report cards as well. So that way it's constant, right? They're giving some positive incentive for learning. And one of the reasons this is important is, and I had a little debates or discussions, not necessarily debates, discussions with people in the past. One of my good teaching friends, he's not necessarily for positive incentives for students. And so he doesn't find anything wrong with it if the students are doing really, really well, but when the vast majority of students are doing very, very poorly, what is the purpose of these positive incentives? It's like the positive incentive is that you get a good grade and you don't fail and you pass on and you can get your high school diploma. Like, that's the incentive. And it's like, yes, that's true. But one of the problems with that is that it's very, very abstract. Like, you tell a student who's in 4th grade, it's like, or even 7th grade or 8th grade or heck, even 9th grade. Look, you're going to graduate in 4, 8, 6, 7 years. You pick your poison, right? Whatever grade it is. They don't really understand that. To them, you may as well have said 5,000 quadrillion years from now, right? It's too abstract, right? It's not immediate. Right? Like, students can only plan their future out, I don't know, a month, 3 months at the most or something, and certainly other people are different than that. There's some students who can plan out years ahead, but those people are, they're the rarity, they're the exception. That's not most students, and so they do exist, obviously, and it also depends on your demographics that you're teaching. Like the kids who are at the best schools in the state, obviously they're probably going to be a little bit more capable of planning ahead that far into the future. But for the vast majority of people, that's just simply not the case, and so you want to be sure that that everybody is, that there is positive incentives, right? That people can look forward to something. And just think about it in terms of the actual working world. I mean, just take an average person that you find on the street. Do they really enjoy what they do? No. They go to work because they have an incentive to do so. What's the incentive? They get money. They get paid for it. And so why expect students to work for free? I mean, it's like, kind of like the same thing. Now you could say, well, maybe we don't pay students. And look, I'm not saying that you pay students, but what I am saying is there needs to be some incentive, right? For people in the working world, that's money. For students, that could be treats. That could be fun activities. Things to make learning a little bit more enjoyable and make the process a little bit more tolerable. I think that's a good word, tolerable. And so people, when they get to the job market, they work for money. And it's like, why do you need money? It's like, okay, well, so you don't be homeless, you don't starve, you can pay your bills, pay your rent, you don't get evicted. It's just common sense, right? You can buy some things that you like and enjoy. Well, students are the same way. They need some incentive, right, to work in a productive, meaningful manner. And so even people who do get paid for jobs, too, if they're not getting paid enough, well, they're not really going to care about their job. Like, why should the person who's making, what is the minimum wage in this country? Like, isn't it like $7.50 or $7.25 an hour, I think, at the federal level? Now, most states are probably moving up, but let's say it's $10. It's like, why should somebody who's making $10 an hour really put their heart and soul into their job? Now, there's reasons why they should put their heart and soul into the job, because it could benefit them in the future, especially if they want to stay in that career field or get letters of recommendation and whatnot. But again, those are other incentives that are a little bit on the outskirts of things. Promotions, chance for that too, if they even want them. Right? But why? But if they're not, but if you paid them more, maybe they care a little bit more. And so if you provide more incentives to students, maybe they care a little bit more. So you're constantly engaging students with these positive incentives via community members, hopefully that you can engage with the school, work something out in terms of resources, because these people aren't going to do it for free. And why should they do it for free? I wouldn't want to, spend thousands of dollars catering something for free. You get paid for it, and you make sure the students are having a good experience as a result of that. And we should budget for these things. And it should be something that becomes a little bit more normalized in society, I would argue. And I think that's a good argument, or at least a valid one. So anyways, we have peers. Right? You should continually be engaging peers. And one of the things that we talked about was kids who are more antisocial make the other kids who are more pro-social more antisocial. Like, it doesn't work in reverse. So it's not like a pro-social kid makes the more antisocial kid more pro-social. Like that, it works the opposite. The more pro-social kid becomes less pro-social. And so, look, these influences they can be very damning to students. It can be very damning to the teacher, the classroom environment, the school environment in general. And if you're not fostering these relationships all the time in a productive manner, so you're not making sure upholding expectations in your classroom with effective behavior management like we talked about, well, these things are going to spiral out of control, and they're going to feed off one another. And these influences are going to make some people behave in manners that are less conducive towards success, academic success, and just success in general when they get to the working world or higher education. So let's just take these peers, for example, right? You're a good student in class. You're in a rough school. And I've had some of them, right? Like, I've had situations where you have some really good students, and they're in your classroom, but they just can't get as much done as they otherwise would have because everybody around them doesn't care. Everybody around them is antisocial. All they want to do is conversate with their friends, get up out of their seat, run around, scream, yell, swear, throw things. Now, you can manage their behavior a little bit, and it's very difficult to do so. And so maybe they're not doing that to the extent that they otherwise would have if you were not there. But the fact that they're capable of doing that at all is indicative of the notion that the more pro-social student who really wants to be there and learn is going to have a more rough and difficult time. And so if you're a teacher, you always got to be focusing on peers, too, and making sure that they're exhibiting this pro-social behavior, which is just behavior management. That's really all it is. You're managing the behavior effectively in your class where you don't have any disciplinary issues. And you want to get at it from day one so that it doesn't perpetuate itself from the first day until the last day of your course or the school year. So peers, next up we have teachers, continual basis for obvious reasons. You always want to be interacting with other teachers that the student has and coming to conclusions about the students. I mean, one good example of this would be students misbehaving in class, right? And you move their seat in a really unique spot, or maybe with a group of people, with a unique group of people. And maybe it starts to work and mitigate some of that antisocial behavior that they're exhibiting. Well, if you don't communicate that with the other teachers, then maybe they're going to still continue to have that same problem with that antisocial student. And they're going to see some of those negative behaviors that they don't want to see in their class. And so, but if you tell them about that, you collaborate with them, you engage them into the fold, then, hey, maybe you can make a difference, right? Because you have more information at your disposal now. Teachers are going to talk, right? They're going to have information about kids that you do not have because you haven't experienced certain things with that kid. And maybe the kid hasn't even opened up to you. So maybe they know some things that the kids just keep in private. And they can tell you, so you don't go back and tell the student or anybody else, right? But you keep it in mind, right? Maybe somebody's having a very rough time. They're homeless, for example, or they're living out of a hotel or a van or something, right? And maybe their life is just very difficult at a certain moment. And you can just take that into consideration when you're interacting with them. So collaborating with these people, other staff members too. We'll cover them real quick. Other staff members, principal, assistant principal, paraprofessionals, aides, intervention specialists, resource officers. You want to be engaged with everybody else who's a staff member. And these people make up the whole school ecosystem, the whole environment. Each person has their own unique role in the ecosystem, and each person is going to interact with somebody in some capacity. Now, it might not be a big capacity. It might be a fraction of a percent, but that fraction of a percent is still an interaction that you need to be well aware of. And people, you can also, by engaging them and collaborating with them, you can have them do what they do best in your own classroom to benefit you. And they'll be willing to do that because it's their job. And they don't go into the field because they don't like working with kids or they don't like their subject. Oftentimes they go into the field because they actually enjoy it, right? And they actually went to school for it. And if they didn't go to school for it, then they ended up there because they enjoy it more than they would have other positions in most cases. And so, well, these staff members, they have a certain role in the ecosystem, and you have to be able to engage them. And so let's just take an assistant principal, for example. It's like, how might they be beneficial? Well, you can plot out negative and positive incentives with the assistant principal for your students. They can help you out with curriculum. They can help you out with instructional strategies. They're certainly going to help you out with behavior management, which is a very great thing. And it could be even better, too, if the school would use something like a behavior matrix to where you have set consequences for set expectations that are not being upheld. And so these things can be very beneficial to the teacher and very beneficial to the ecosystem at large, because what benefits one teacher might benefit another teacher as well. And so maybe you make a certain arrangement with an assistant principal, and they want to get on it too. And so now everybody's upholding the same expectations around the school. So they can't just go into one classroom and say, well, hey, they allow me to do this, but you don't allow me to do this, and so therefore I'm just going to do this, do what you don't want me to do. All right? They won't have that. They won't be able to have that discussion as easily if everybody's on the same page, and so they're always collaborating with one another. So anyways, collaboration is extremely important. It always makes a lot of sense to engage these stakeholders in any capacity that you can. And we'll provide some good examples of how you can do so. Because it is very difficult, and it's one of those things that oftentimes is very informal. Now, you can make parent interactions or community member interactions very formal. But for like any staff members or students themselves or peers, it tends to be very informal. Now, you can use data, which you could argue is formal, to sort of guide your reasoning and your rationale and your decision making. And you could argue that that's formal, right? But a lot of this is going to be informal. Just even talking to a teacher as you go down the hall as another teacher would be a form of informal interaction where they tell you, hey, look, you could try this, this, or that with that student, and that's going to benefit you. So what is the importance of this? We talked about it a little bit here, but I want to show you the math, right? Because this is very important. All right, so here's the importance. Personality is roughly 50% heritable. All right, so nature versus nurture, it's 50-50, right? And 50-50 is being pretty generous, right? And the reason for that is because there's a lot of evidence to suggest that over time, so by the time people have less environmental influences on them, their personality is about 80% heritable. 80% means that you have almost no difference at all. And so by the time that somebody's like a senior, they have nobody constraining them in almost any capacity. Their personality is just entirely what they're born with, essentially. Essentially, right? Not entirely, but essentially. And look, a lot of these things are going to be embedded in us from the environment, but 80% is that just tells you, like, look, if somebody's born an extrovert, they're going to be an extrovert. If somebody's born an introvert, they're going to be an introvert. If somebody's just very disagreeable, they're going to be disagreeable. If somebody's very open and creative, look, they're going to be creative. You can't beat it out of somebody, right? It's just that's their nature, right? They're just going to stay like that. And so personality is roughly 50% heritable, though. For students, 50-50. Now, personality is concerned with the student's innate proclivity to engage in certain behaviors, right? So proclivities, they're inclined to engage in certain behaviors. And your goal is to stray them as far away from antisocial behavior as possible via collaboration with others. And so any one person does not make the difference. It takes a village to raise a child. And there's like 40 million exclamation points right there for good reasons. It takes a village to raise a child. And so what is the math on this? Where am I getting this from? Because I'm making some big claims here, and I want to make sure that people really recognize what the true difference and impact can be as an individual teacher on a person's personality. And so all you got to do is break it down by the amount of time that you're with somebody, the control that you have over the environment, as well as the amount of, well, that's really it. And so, and you got to factor in their age as well. So anyways, let's start off here. I did the math, and the difference that you can make as one individual teacher teaching 1 hour a day for 1 year, 1 school year, is about 0.041%. Now, there's some assumptions that have to be made when we're making this, when we're getting this number here, but we're going to go through it here. So, how do you come up with that little bit of an impact towards a person's personality, right? And so that's assuming 50% heritability, right? So you start off, you say, okay, what is the heritability of a person's personality, a student's personality? Let's just say that they're 15 years old, right? So we're just assuming that the student is 15 years old. That's what we're assuming. That's an assumption. Now, you could say, well, they're 12 years old, or you could say, well, they're 10 years old, and like, fair enough, like, right? But you have to state that, right? So it's not just, you can pick whatever you want. And so you start off, you say 50% heritable, so you do 0.5, right? You make a decimal point, right? Then you got to times that by the number of days you're with the student in the amount of time that the student was alive, right? And so if the student is 15 years old, you take 15 times 365, that's going to be the number of days that they've been alive, right? So you put that into parentheses. Then you take 180 days, which is how many school days there are in a year. So 180 days divided by 365 times 15, right? And so that's going to be the number of days that you're with them for the amount of time that they've been alive. Then you times that by the amount of control that you have over your environment, right? Because think about it, right? I'm not like a wizard. I don't have telekinesis. I can't perfectly control my environment, right? Like I can't just sit there and be like telekinesis and just start moving tables up, right? Up around the classroom with my mind, right? I'm moving them around with my mind, right? Moving things up and down. If I have students talking, I can't just be like, snap my fingers, they never talk ever again, right? Or I can't just like snap my fingers and everybody just moves straight towards me like this, like they'll just be sitting in a desk, right? I can't just snap my fingers and they just go like this. And they're just ready to learn, totally engaged, right? Every ounce of focus is on the board, and they're ready to learn, and they're ready to get those good grades. I can't do that because I don't have complete control over the environment, right? And so, like, you have to recognize that as a teacher. So this is another variable, right? Now, this is arbitrary. You could say, well, they have 80% control over the environment, or they only have 40% control over the environment, right? But we're just making an assumption. We're assuming that a teacher has 60% control over an environment. So we're saying 0.6 will be our next factor there. So again, we got heritability times the amount of days that you've been with them divided by the amount of time that they've been alive times 0.6, the amount of control you have over the environment. And then this is the amount of hours that you're going to be with them per day, right? Because yes, you're with them 180 days, but you're not with them 24 hours a day for those 180 days. You're with them only 1 hour a day for those 180 days, right? So because you're only with them for one period a day, right? And so 1 divided by 24, right? So you put that all in parentheses and you're going to get a number. It's going to spit out some number, right? And then you times that by 100, right? Because that's just the decimal, so you got to times it by 100 in order to get the percentage. And you get 0.041%. And that's the impact that you can make to a person's personality, right? Because that's the impact, because that's the amount of personality that, because there's only so much personality in that 50% that you can alter, right? That comes from the environment. And so, very small difference. And you think to yourself, well, how on earth am I going to be able to alter their, how on earth can I possibly alter their environment that much and make a difference? It's like, well, you simply can't make a difference by yourself. I mean, you just can't. Now, what we're going to look at next would be, can you make a difference if you engage everybody? So that's the real question, right? So alone, you don't make a difference. But if you engage the village, it takes a village to raise a child. Now we can start talking some real numbers here. So we're still going to assume 50% heritability. So 0.5 times, again, they're 15 years old. So 365 times 15, right? And we're going to divide that by 365 times 15, right? So we're engaging them positively with all stakeholders every single day from the first day they were born, right? So 365 times 15 divided by 365 times 15, right? So that's just, it's really just, times 1, right? And so, anyways, times 0.6, right? Again, the amount of control that you have over the environment, that's going to stay constant, right? You can't change that, right? Again, it's an arbitrary number, right? But you can't change that. And so the numbers that are going to be the end here could go up or down depending on this factor pretty easily. And same for the heritability of personality. You could go up or down. It could change drastically. But then how many hours a day? We're going to do 16 divided by 24, right? Because it's assuming that they're left to their own accord when they're going to sleep for 8 hours. Now, they could stay awake and do whatever they want, but we're just assuming 16 divided by 24 because you can't really influence them when they're just in their bedroom and they're supposed to be sleeping. And so 16 divided by 24 times 100, right? Which so you take all of that, you put that in parentheses, you get some number, and you times that by 100 because, again, we had a decimal. We need to make it a percentage. That's 100. Now it's a 20% difference. And that 20% difference could be the difference between pro-social behavior and anti-social behavior. So you have to understand the math behind these things, right? They're extremely complex, but heritability of personality is going to be very indicative of, very indicative of the proclivities that they're expressing within their environment. So you have to understand this, right? You don't make a difference alone, right? But if you can engage everybody, which is where this 16 out of 24 hours a day would be, and this 365 divided by 15 times 15 would be, right? You're engaging all these other stakeholders into the fold. Now you can make a big difference. But that difference, look, you're talking a lot of time, right? This doesn't happen overnight, right? It doesn't happen overnight. This is a very long period of time. And you could say, well, the vast majority of the aspect of personality that's not heritable, it comes from the early childhood education. Now, you could say, okay, so then therefore 20% would be even less. And so we're just going to assume that, right? So 20% is like the most optimistic thing imaginable, right? So ideally, the people who have the most impact are the people who are influencing the kids at the earliest, youngest age possible. And so 20% is very optimistic, but hey, look, maybe that difference is possible under the most bestest circumstances imaginable, right? But we're just assume that it's going to be even lower than that. And if you assume that it's lower than that, then you recognize the importance for early childhood education and engaging stakeholders properly in a productive, positive manner. So that's the importance of personality. The difference that you make is very minimal. And if you're not engaging stakeholders, you're going to have a very, very rough time. And it's very difficult to do so. So here's some examples that we're going to look at to help us along. So examples of stakeholder engagement. So parent-teacher student conferences. Yes, students should be included in conferences. There's a lot of literature to support the notion that students should be there so that they can reflect on their own performance and they can help the parents and the teachers devise a plan moving forward to rectify any poor performance or improve positive performance for that matter, any performance that's really good. And so parent-teacher student conferences, very good thing. Always try to include the student. Now, some people, it's funny, I was in a doctoral class the other day, and people were arguing that students should be involved in all form of assessment. And assessment could be included under the category of conferences because when you're assessing, you're also providing feedback. And feedback would be provided in a conference. And so You're just providing assessment results to the parent, and so as well as the student for that matter too. And so you could say, well, it ties in with assessment, and you can say, okay, cool. But one thing that is very interesting is people said that students should be included in the assessment process in terms of its creation. So they should be creating assessments as well. I disagree with that. I think the teachers are professional. I think they should be the ones assessing students for their performance. But students can differentiate assessments themselves to some degree, right? So they can plan out what they want to do for a particular project. But they're constrained by that. So they don't have total power, but they can differentiate it themselves according to their interest. And so that's a pretty interesting thing here. Parent, teacher, student conferences. It should be one thing that you're always striving to do at least, ideally, probably 4 times a year, right? In actuality, 2 times a year. But ideally, we'll say 4 times. All right, digitally contacting parents. What does that mean? Phone calls, texting, emails. You could also even be using a learning management system. So you could be using like a Class Dojo. You could somehow find a way to use PowerSchool, Canvas, Blackboard. There's no shortage of ways in which to contact parents, but it could be a little more difficult depending on the software that you have. And so digitally contacting parents is extremely important. You want to provide them with toolkits for helping out too. So you don't want to just tell them how their student's doing. You also want to tell them, and then you want to provide a plan to help their student moving out forward, or tell them at least some things that their student could do to benefit in the class. And so one of the things that I'll do when I call up a parent, I'll say, look, why don't I just give you an update on their performance, blah, 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 blah. They're doing this, this, and this. And try to provide some positive things as well. So don't just level out, just level them with just absolutely horrific things that their students are doing. Try to find some positive things. And the reason for that is because if you only tell them negative things, then the next time you call, they're going to hit decline because they don't want to just only hear negatives. And sometimes kids don't have any positives. And I've been in that situation before where there's, look, I had a kid get a 0% in my class one time because he literally refused. Like it was unbelievable because it blew my mind. This is a 7th grader. He would just make out with cabinets. And I'm like, what is wrong? I could not understand what was wrong with this kid. Now, he needed to be in a behavior room, but the school that I was at, it just wasn't feasible. And so, what if you have a difficult student like that, right? There might not be anything positive that you can say, right? But you can try to make it positive in the sense that you can say, well, look, I would like to have them in class, but they need to start being more respectful. They need to start doing their work. And they can do this, this, and this to try to help them along. And they can put this, this, and this. They can do this, this, and this in terms of their effort in order to benefit their academic career. And you can try this, this, and this at home, and blah, 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 blah. And so, it might be difficult, but you got to find something positive that you can say, even if it sounds very small, minimal, or just general in some regards. And so, these toolkits for helping is very vital, very important. And I would recommend it. I would recommend it for every phone call. And then you're going to have students who are doing it. They're not always at the extremes, right? So they're not getting a 0% in a class. But, you're going to have students who are at 40, 50%. And then your advice for them can become more tailored and more personalized because you know where they're struggling. And if they're at 50%, they only need 10% more to pass the class, a D, 20% more to do what I would consider passing a C. Well, that's not... You can make that difference in terms of their grade. It's not going to be that difficult to do, but it's going to take a lot more responsibility on your end as the teacher because you have to provide them the opportunities to most likely make up work at that point, to constantly be on their case about doing work and being respectful in class and abiding by expectations and reaching out to parents and just engaging the other stakeholders. And that can be difficult. And so it's going to take a lot of responsibility on your end for doing some of these things. But you can help. And so try to say something positive. Also provide ways in which they can move forward. Because one of the things with grading is, and we talked about this, is that grading is, the whole purpose of a grade is not necessarily to just rank order students. Like we've been down that route. We know that that's not exactly how things should be working. And so one of the things that you should do when you are grading is look for ways to provide feedback to your students so that they can improve moving forward. So you're telling them where they went wrong, and you want them to improve moving forward. That's the whole purpose behind grading and providing that feedback. And so yes, you're ranking students. Yes, you're giving them a baseline in terms of, you're giving them you're identifying where they're at in terms of their understanding, but you're also telling them how they can improve. So toolkits for helping, reaching out to businesses, right? So this is fundraisers. One of the things that happened when I was in school is our school would engage the local Chipotle, and we would have Chipotle fundraisers. So Chipotle would donate whatever it was, I don't know, maybe 20% of profits to the school. And so anybody who went to Chipotle, they knew that they were benefiting the school, or 50% of profits or whatever. And so why would a business want to do this? Well, the school is going to drive a whole bunch of traffic to Chipotle, and Chipotle is going to make more money than they otherwise would have as a result of the fundraiser. And so reaching out to businesses can be very influential, and doing so for the positive incentives as well. Some schools like to do little coupons that they'll do for either like a, well, hey, look, you could even do like a spiritware store in your school. Some schools have that, where they'll have, like, let's say your school is the alligators, right, or the gators, like the so-and-so gators. They'll have a gator shop in their school, and that gator shop will have a bunch of school merch, or maybe snacks and treats and whatnot. And the students, when they behave properly under like a PBIS system, a positive behavioral intervention support system, or what should really be called a PBSS system, positive behavior support system, but it's never called that. They might get like little dollars or coupons and whatnot that they can purchase goods for at the store. And that's a nice thing, right? And those goods could be sourced from local businesses. So the merch could be made through a local business, and the students purchase those with the bucks, and so they're with the gator bucks that they're getting, right? And so it's a positive incentive that the business is working behind the scenes on. Or they can just be more upfront, like the Chipotle situation, right? So it really does depend. But schools have to be willing to sponsor this. It will be a little bit more expensive, but it's something that schools should be striving to do and engage with in their community. And so that's ideal. School events, career days, field days, fundraisers. These are things that people should be engaging with all the time, right? I mean, these should always be constant. Some of the best schools, you always notice, they always have fundraisers all the time, right? Because they always have these nice, expensive programs, and they want the best for their kids. And you could say, well, not everybody has the money to throw at the school like that, and that's true. So then maybe it becomes more the responsibility of the school to put some of their funds and allocate them, set them aside, and allocate them towards some of these stakeholder events. And that's certainly reasonable, or just some of these events that are more enriching for this child's education. And so, career days could be easy, though. It's a free thing. You just invite people in to talk about their careers, so students get a general idea about some careers that are out there that they could potentially engage with when they graduate. Field days, that's a fun little thing. You can engage the community. And how would you engage stakeholders in a field day? Businesses could provide some of the food when they go to, when they're outside. Parents could come as chaperones, and you can maybe even have somebody record it, so it could be put online for everybody to view and look at the fun activities and events and competitions that are going on, and maybe they can peep for prizes and rewards and whatnot. And then fundraisers. So, well, that's obvious. You have volunteers for that, and businesses themselves. So letters is the next thing. You could write personalized letters to parents, or just even type them up and then sign your name at the bottom. Then input their student name just by hitting backspace a few times and typing it in. And so you can do that, and that's a nice way to engage stakeholders, especially at the start of the year. Just write some letters to them, and just sign them all, and just have them mailed out, so that way they can just, one of the first interactions they have with you is, wow, they really care. They wrote me a nice letter. They told me what to expect for the school year. That's a really nice thing. And it just sets the foot off right, because they don't know you. They don't know what your motives are, and if you're going to be a good teacher, and who are you, right? And you could say, well, I didn't get here by just not being a good teacher, but they don't know that. And so you want to give them some reason to actually like you. And one of the ways that you do that is just a letter. And it also, because you're going to hand home papers anyways about your expectations and whatnot, right? But you can also just do the letter, just to introduce yourself. So just a little nice thing. And not everybody's going to come to parent-teacher conferences. And so it's just nice, right? It's a nice first interaction. You can give them a call too. And so not everybody's going to answer those, and so just something that is going to reach the parents that they're going to have to see, and there's really no way around that. So letters is a pretty cool thing. Next up, administrator meetings/updates. Administrator meetings/updates, just talking with your administration, right? And they can help you out on a lot of different things, because they have a lot of power. And that's one thing that you might not necessarily have as much of when you're a teacher. in comparison to the administration, right? Because the administration determines who gets kicked out of your class. The administration determines what the positive and negative incentives can be in some regards. And they're also going to determine a lot about what you can and can't do with stakeholders, right? And so there's going to be different school policies at different schools and different practices at different schools. But administrative meetings and updates, right? You can provide them updates about the students, and they can know how to interact with those students in a more productive manner on your behalf. And they're willing to do that because that's their job. As well as just even promoting your own growth as a teacher, right? So don't think that you know everything. You can always improve. Even the best of us can always improve. And they can help you along that because they've been down that route to some degree, right? Now maybe they're not as good as a teacher as you, right? But you can still learn something from them, right? Even if you're not learning everything from them, you can still learn something. Even if 30 of the things that they said have been completely useless to you, on the 31st time they might give you some invaluable knowledge that you can use to better your craft. And so always be listening, always be looking to improve. And administrators is a great way to do that. Oftentimes they know what they're talking about, and they have rapport with the students in the sense that they have more power, and so they can get the students to act however they want, and you're not able to do that because you don't have the same power as them, right? You don't have the same authority as they do. And so working with them just by association makes you more powerful to your students because they say, look, come on, you don't want me to have to call so-and-so. We'll get them up here right now. Let's sit next to y'all class, right? You don't want that, do you? And they get in shape, right? So maybe even have them do that like once or twice. And maybe the student knows like, oh man, I can't mess around now because that'll happen again. They don't want that. And so, look, administrator meetings / updates, just getting them into the fold any way that you possibly can. Give them updates about things. Tell them, hey, look, my class average right now is this, this, and this. This lesson's going pretty good. I felt like it was a great one. Maybe we want to share it for other teachers. And I'm talking about it in a collaboration with so-and-so and so-and-so. Or even say, look, we're thinking about doing this, this, and that. Wondering what your input is on that and how we can move forward to put this into, to actualize that plan. So administrative meetings and updates, very crucial. And lastly, talking to other staff members. And you can do this just informally, right? Some schools have what's called PLCs. I think it's, professional learning committees. So they're going to be interacting with other teachers for a lot of times, trying to improve on certain projects usually. So action research, they're identifying a problem and they're trying to rectify it through some data-driven solution or evidence-based practices, right? And so you're structuring an intervention, you're implementing it, you're going back, you're looking at it and say, well, it didn't work exactly how we want, and you're tailoring it, and so you're fine-tuning things until you can fully remediate a problem or doing it as much as you possibly can. Or just at least make it better, right? That's always the goal, make things better than they once were. And you can always do that, but it just takes a lot of time. And so, and things, eventually could level off, but, and that might be different where they level off for every school, right? But at least you can make things slightly better, even if it's just 0.1% better, you can make things better. And so talking to other staff members, they might not go up indefinitely, but it'll level off eventually, but you can make things always slightly better, even if it's just 0.001%, right? So anyways, talking to other staff members, very crucial. Always want to be talking with them. So TBTs is another one that you could do. PLCs was important in the professional learning committees. TBTs, teacher-based teams. A lot of schools nowadays have teacher-based teams where teachers are given time every day to work with teams and collaborate. So maybe you have like a collaboration planning period for that matter. Or maybe it's not even every day, but every once in a while you're going to have some form of planning together with other staff members. And so very vital, talking to other staff members. And then lastly here, we got the parent contact sheet. This is just a little example here that you could do if you want to implement it in your practice. I just figured I'd include it. So you always want to be documenting interactions because you never want anything to come back and bite you. You always want interactions to be very quantifiable in some regards. Or I mean, they're qualitative, right? They're not quantifiable. Just documentation, right? Just in general, documentation is the word, right? You want to have all these interactions documented for your own protection. And you can do things with documentation, right? You can have students get held back, for example. If you don't have any documentation that you never reached out to parents before, you probably don't want to try to hold the kid back because you weren't doing all that you could to try to better their education, right? So you want to say that you've done everything you can and they would benefit by being held back, right? And so parent contact sheet. And this is just for phone calls, right? You could do this for all types of communication, right? But student, right? You list the student that you're going to call. parent name, right? Number of the parent, and then put some notes, right? Just a small sentence or two, right? It doesn't have to be large, and it could be large. Maybe it's a detailed interaction. You want to write some detailed notes, but you just do no contact. You could even put NC, right? You put no contact again, NC, 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 and then just initial it. So Ian Phillips, IP, right? Told them their student grades and mentioned behavior issues. IP. Told them their students' grades and emailed them a list of things to help their student. IP. Told them their students' grades and, you just go on, right? This is just parent contact sheet, right? Just basic, right? Give them some advice about how to help their student, right? So this is just little notes, little interactions, a sentence, 2 at the most. You can maybe do 3 or 4 at the absolute maximum. But just little notes about things, right? You can make it pretty easy. NC, IP. They don't answer, you left a voicemail. You can even put VM, voicemail, IP. And so that's just one way to reach out to parents, and you're documenting it too. So you can always say, well, I was reaching out to parents. And instead of even doing this in like Word, for example, which is where I like to do things sometimes, you could even have one with like Google Docs, where you can have like an Excel spreadsheet like on Google Docs where anybody can edit it. So you have all the teachers, interacting with the document, and they're all putting their stakeholder engagement on the chart. So any parent, any teacher who's reaching out to these parents or staff members can put what they talked to them about and when they reached out. And so you can constantly see the engagement from everybody on everybody's behalf. And so you know if, say, so-and-so called them 1 week, like last week, maybe it doesn't make sense to call them the next week, right? Or maybe you can call them another week from now if you want to. And so try to reach out to parents every like 2-3 weeks or so. I think that's a pretty good time. No later than a month. A month is probably the maximum time you want to wait. So just constantly engaging them throughout the year, and they're going to respect you for it. But tell them some positive things as well as negative things. And so, because if you only tell them negative, or hey, even if you're in the middle of a class, right, and you only tell them negative things every time, then eventually they're just not going to answer your calls. And so you don't want that. And then they're not engaged at all in the student's education. And if they're not engaged, then you know what happens because we covered the math. And so you want them engaged positively and productively as much as you can. And and even if they're like antisocial or not, like they're not really their input is not that conducive towards student success and growth, you can at least try to influence them as much as you possibly can to make it better. It's better. That's what we're going for. It's just being better. And even if you can't do it perfectly, like you're not going to get a very antisocial parent to all of a sudden become the most pro-social parent on the planet, right? But you can make them slightly better by being involved with them. And so that's the ultimate goal of student. The ultimate goal of fostering stakeholder engagement, and just be better on all fronts. And so the difference between pro-social and antisocial behavior, the line is you can hop over it one way or another, right? Like we could all do crimes, we could all do, most people's probably speed, for example, at one point or another on the road. And so that's antisocial behavior, right? You're not abiding by the societal expectations, right? Which is the law, the rules that you have to follow. And so, look, these things are complex. These things are line thin. Go one side or the other quickly. And if you're not doing things properly, it could be pretty bad. But if you are doing things properly, then you don't really got much to worry about. And so just to constantly engage people in a positive manner. And you know what a positive manner is because you're a teacher, right? You've been down that route. You know what you need to do to make the student successful. You know what you need to do so that way they can function in society and not hit other people and swear at them and sit normally. Because you go to a job, you start punching people, or you go to a job, you start throwing things at people. You go to a job, you start swearing constantly. You're not going to have a job for long. And maybe you do in some places, industries, but not in most. And so fostering that pro-social behavior, which is the most important thing with stakeholder engagement and collaboration. And then pro-social behavior also goes down with just getting those academic grades up. So they're learning more as a result. And maybe they're accruing some interest acquisition. So they're uncovering their interest, and they can hopefully find a career that suits them once they graduate school. And that's what we want to see as teachers. So anyways, questions, comments, leave them down below. Make sure to like the video. Subscribe. Please subscribe. And it's always so funny how YouTubers say that, but it would be nice. And social media, at Ian Phillips USA. Timestamps are in the description below. APA citation is in the description below. And feel free to reach out, and I'll be sure to answer any questions you guys have. And thank you very much.